The 1970s. Well, as you can see, I mean, the 1960s was full of change, full of upheaval, some great things, some epic tragedies. But when we get into the 1970s, the hippie movement sort of dies. It sort of is at its end. And the 60s, the 70s are a time, very special time for Canada, but a unique time for the rest of the world. But right now, I'd like to talk to you about something that really the 70s are known for, and that is music. Now you're like, well, what about the Sgt. Pepper and Woodstock and all? Sure. In the 1960s, you had a very, very unique sound. However, it was the 70s that you saw such a divergence of musical genres. You really did. In fact, you have the birth of modern music throughout the 70s. Now you got your old-time classic rock and roll. Nothing's changed there. The Boss, Bruce Springsteen, of course, and Fleetwood Mac, they ruled the 70s. But you also have, well, one of your parents' biggest mistakes, which is disco. That's right. Disco music. Awful suits, glitter. People like to dance to it. You have also the advent of a new harder edge rock and roll, or hard rock. And bands like Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath, of course, they developed this sound. This will come huge in the 1980s. You also have a reggae, right? 1972, Bob Marley and the Wailers became international hits. You also have pop music, and one of the classics. Now, in the 1960s, we talked about this. People loved music because the parents hated it. Same with the 50s. But when it came to groups like ABBA, well, your parents were listening on with you, and that's just no good. You also had electronic music. And there was a group out of Dusseldorf, Germany, called Kraftwerk. And Kraftwerk were the first electronic or electro, I don't even know what you call it, using synthesizers and electronics to produce musical sound. Country music, you have a lot of mainstream country music like John Denver. And you also have punk music. Punk music starts in the mid-70s in the UK, and of course bands like the Sex Pistols and the Jam. These are punk music, and it catches on like wildfire. But a lot of you are rap fans. When did it really start? Well, rap music came out of the 70s, and the first commercially successful rap music. Now, I could be wrong at this because I'm not an expert in this, but I have it here, and I'm going to show you. It's a 45. I have to go somewhere else to show you. And it's called Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang. Gotta take a listen. If the 60s were a decade of change, social change, the decade of women's rights really didn't hit until the 1970s. And a lot of people took the lessons of the 60s to make meaningful change for pay equity and just to try to end sexism in general. I mean, sexism, ladies and gentlemen, was rampant, right? And in fact, people would make these awful sexist remarks about women are no good at this and women are no good at this. One of the most famous examples in the 1970s was a ex-Wimbledon champion. His name was Bobby Riggs. And Bobby Riggs, let's say, was a bit misogynist. And he made a comment that no woman or women's tennis was a joke, and no woman could beat him. In fact, he could beat any woman with one arm tied behind his back. Well, the reigning champion at the time, her name was Billie Jean King, very famous tennis player. She, of course, accepted the challenge, and it is, I think, still one of the largest watched tennis matches in history at the Houston Astrodome. Billie Jean King whooped him. Just took him to the cleaners. And it really struck a blow for misogynist people everywhere to say, no, women are equal and they can do just anything that men can. Like Kraftwerk, technology was on the rise. And there's these two dudes in California. They're the two Steves, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. And these two guys in their garage came up with the Apple computer. And in fact, when they got to market it, it was called the Apple II. And it was the first user-friendly color computer with cool graphics. I mean, by today's standards, it's nothing. I think today's calculators have more memory. But it still marked the beginning of Apple and, of course, Apple computers. Apple is one of the most recognized logos in the entire world. The other most recognized is Nike. And of course, Nike also got its start in the 1970s. It was an actual track coach in Oregon. And this track coach basically took rubber and poured it into a waffle iron to make that waffle sole, that waffle base for the Nike shoe. But the 70s weren't all happy times. Obviously, we still have a Cold War on, which is raging and causing people discomfort. Still inequality between races, inequality in the sexes, gas shortages. You have the growth of terrorism. You have the growth, also the realization that something has to be done about our environment, about our planet. And so people start to take steps to start to clean up the Great Lakes. And that all took place in the 1970s. Trudeau was the prime minister of this country throughout the entire region. We've already seen the FLQ and the growth of separatism. It's interesting, too, in 1976, we hosted the Olympics, and we hadn't hosted Olympics very much. And of course, it was a big deal. I was a kid, and I got my own Adidas jacket. And I don't know if I can find a picture of it for you, but it was epic. I was very proud of it because it had 1976 on it, and it was very cool. But in the Olympics in Montreal were very special because there was an American decathlete, and he won golds. He became a hero. In fact, I ate his breakfast cereal. He was on the cover of Wheaties. Everyone wanted to be like him. He was a trailblazer, and his name was Bruce Jenner. Today, she is known as Caitlyn Jenner, the most famous transgender person on the planet. But as a kid growing up in the 70s, I survived disco, I survived a lot of things. But the thing that sticks with me, the thing that beyond anything else in the 1970s was, of course, Star Wars. 1976, Star Wars premiered, and it was made in 1976. It came out in 77. And my goodness, I'll never forget, it was August. I was just a kid. My mother took me and my brother, and we sat there, and I couldn't believe it. And back in the day, we didn't have Netflix or VCRs or DVD players or anything like that. So you had to keep going back. So I think I saw it 4 or 5 times. Everyone had to see that. That movie, Star Wars, it actually stayed in the theaters for over a year, which by today's standards, unprecedented. Now, why am I telling you this? Because it marked a change in how movies were made. Not only were technically you had these Lucas films, which are amazing. They've changed their technology, and of course it became, because before that, space movies didn't look so good technology. Just check out old Star Trek episode. But after Star Wars, things changed. Also, sound changed. Lucasfilms created THX, which of course you know it as the surround sound you hear in the movies. Also, marketing radically changed. Before then, no one made toys of movies. A toy company called Kenner actually started making toys of the characters of Star Wars, and they became very popular. I, as a kid, kept bothering my mother. Mom, I need Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia, and of course she refused to buy them for me. I remind her now that if we had bought them back in the day in 1977, 78, and kept them in their packages, well, we'd be millionaires right now. Mom, you should have listened. So, in the immortal words of the Bee Gees, ladies and gentlemen, stay alive and be well.